What's up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. Today we're going to be going through the Week 5 risers and fallers, giving you guys some trade tips this week for your season-long fantasy league. But hey, before we get started, if you're new to the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help support the channel, help us grow. I do appreciate that, but let's get right into the video. Okay, so we are almost halfway done with the XFL season already. It feels like it just started, but each week we learn a bit more about these teams and good bit of shakeups in the landscape over the course of this last week. So we'll do as we normally do. We'll go team by team and look at some risers, fallers, and players that I'm cautioning you to hold steady on. Don't fall for last week's performance too much, or just things going on around the team. In some cases, we just want to hang on and let the chips fall before we make any sudden movement. So we begin with the Dallas Renegades, as we always do. Risers in this one, obviously Phillips Nelson, seeing a boost in his value. A lot of that has to do with the fact that obviously Landry Jones got hurt. Now there has been some news that's broken today that Landry Jones is actually now looking that he might only miss 2 weeks. I'm thinking it will still probably be closer to 3-4, especially since he was already dealing with a knee injury. Now he has a partially torn MCL. They won't want to rush him back on too quickly. He is a little bit older as well, so that might also impede his recovery time. But I think what will also be a key factor is how well Phillips Nelson is performing. Thus far, he hasn't really shown too much that he is able to really take this team over, but he's only played against St. Louis, who was doing really well, and then he came on late in that game against Houston. So this will be a really telling performance this week, getting to go against the Guardians, who are pretty good on defense as well. If he can rally and win, then he will probably end up keeping Landry Jones on the sidelines a little bit longer. Another riser in this one, Flynn Nagel, slot receiver there for the Renegades, looked really good most of the weeks thus far, and he had 6 targets last time Phillips Nelson was the quarterback. But with that, we see the fallers. I've already mentioned Landry Jones, don't really need to get into him anymore, but Jeff Badet, someone we really liked to start the year, just hasn't been performing at the clip that we've been expecting. They really haven't been using their wide receivers too much in the system. It's mostly just been funneling through the running backs and the tight ends, and Flynn Nagel is the only receiver there getting consistent volume. I don't look for that to change even with Phillips Nelson coming into the fray. As far as our hold steadies this week, I'm definitely holding steady on Donald Parham and the running backs Cameron Artis-Payne and Lance Dunbar. No real reason to panic on them just yet. Again, as we mentioned, Landry Jones could very well come back here within the next couple weeks, and we'll see if Phillips Nelson can maintain their value. But the way that this system is moving right now, I think that Artis-Payne, Dunbar, and Parham will all maintain around the same value. It's not like Landry Jones was playing lights out. Anyway, all right, jumping over to the DC Defenders. No risers after their 2 poor performances. We're just trying to figure out which pieces are still even worth maintaining anymore. We have a lot of followers here. Cardale Jones, 2 terrible performances in a row, just not looking good for him. You've got Eli Rogers also falling a bit. He still is getting a lot of targets, but the targets have just been nowhere near as accurate or as healthy for them. Deandre Thompkins was getting called out by Cardale Jones in the middle of the game, which I don't really know whether that's more his fault or Jones' fault, but can't be good for his stock. And then Khari Lee with another dud. He seems to be the most volatile of all of the second-tier tight end guys right now. That he either scores a touchdown for you or you're going to be pretty disappointed in his performance. So all of those guys see a pretty massive decline in their value. I did bring Rashad Ross down as well, but I'm still cautioning to hold steady on him somewhat. This is probably a decent buy low moment if the DC Defenders can turn things around. I realize that they might not, and if they don't, then Rashad Ross, this might be the last chance to get out on him. I still think that he has a decent chance of rebounding. He should have had like a 70-yard touchdown this last week. Cardale Jones just barely missed him, had it right on his fingertips, but hopefully they can get some more confidence going back home this week. They're playing a tough game against St. Louis. If they can play strong in this one, that should give them the confidence they need going forward. Let's jump over to Houston. Don't need to mention a lot of the names here, but definitely rising is Nick Holley after that 9 catch day on Sunday, looking to be the predominant slot receiver here in a team that will utilize 4 or 5 wide receiver sets pretty often. He has been the third most consistent guy outside of Cam Phillips and Khalil Lewis. Great game this week. Don't expect that kind of performance from him every single week, but really like what he's doing. No fallers in here are really huge to mention, but pretty much any other wide receiver that isn't Cam Phillips, Khalil Lewis, or Nick Holley at this point has seen their value drop just because it's basically been a roulette wheel of, is it Raheem Malone or Blake Jackson or Sammy Coates that's going to get the targets this week? Sammy Coates still been one of the biggest disappointments in all of for all the wide receivers across the XFL. So hang tight on those until we see either an injury happen or someone break out. But for now, Nick Holley seems to be that third guy outside of the two big guys, which are Cam Phillips and Khalil Lewis. I'm holding steady on them. Khalil Lewis had a ridiculous amount of targets. He still sees a very high target share in this system. He's very close to that breakout game that everyone's going to be disappointed if you benched him. And then obviously Cam Phillips only had one catch this week after having two multiple hat tricks. He still leads all wide receivers for fantasy points by far. Don't worry too much about this. The Dallas Renegades are actually the best team in the league against their number one wide receiver opponent. So they just focused on shutting down Cam Phillips, and the Houston Roughnecks just pivoted to Nick Holley. Also holding steady on James Butler. The Renegades are also pretty good at stopping the run. James Butler still looks pretty good. He's still getting the majority of carries out of the backfield and is getting targets. So on a team as potent as Houston, you don't want to panic on James Butler just yet. Okay, looking at the LA Wildcats, Trey McBride, massive boost to his value again after two strong performances in a row. This is also going to be even more dependent on how hurt Nelson Spruce is, but Trey McBride looks to be the real deal in LA with Josh Johnson, who's playing as probably the best raw quarterback talent right now. Yes, Philip Walker is a bit more electric, but Josh Johnson is throwing the ball as I believe is the most accurate quarterback. Maybe Jordan Teamu has him beat in that category, but you can have that debate. Jordan Smallwood also seeing the value there. Now that value is somewhat temporary because if Nelson Spruce comes back, look for his volume to dip back down, but we still are not sure on Nelson Spruce's injury. Speaking of Nelson Spruce, just kind of holding steady on him for now, waiting until we get some more news on that injury. If we find out that he's going to be out for extended periods of time, we'll throw him into the fallers category. But for now, until we know more, we're holding him there. Same thing for Martez Carter, holding his value steady. We saw how explosive he was against the defenders in week 3. There really hasn't been any electrifying play from any of the running backs here in LA other than Martez Carter, so this should be his backfield when he gets back. He missed last week with an ankle injury. Hopefully he's back this week. But with that, all the other running backs in this system, at this point you can probably just drop them. Nobody's showing out here. Martez Carter is the only guy here that's showing any semblance of good running back plays, so move on from everybody else. Okay, looking at the New York Guardians, lots of risers here. They finally saw an uptick in their offensive volume with Luis Perez at quarterback. He sees a massive rise here. Looks like this should be his show until further notice. Really like what he's doing there. One of the highest quarterback ratings. He's not taking a lot of risks. He's probably not going to have an incredibly high ceiling, but he is playing pretty sharp, and they're moving more to the run game as well in New York, which brings a high value uptick for Darius Victor, who looked pretty good on Sunday. One of the best running backs in yards after contact right now. Definitely the best power back in the league. He's just not too involved in the passing game, which does suppress his value a little bit. Mikael McKay got his first touchdown on a very athletic catch in the end zone and should have had a second one, but he dropped the ball, was on his hands, just couldn't come down with it. But he did break free for a deep target, so hopefully he'll be able to get that play out of his head and be able to play better going forward. Colby Pearson, the slot receiver there, is also receiving a lot of targets from Luis Perez, so definitely a name to look at going forward. And then Jake Powell, the tight end, seeing some red zone targets and just overall usage in this offense, like him a lot. The fallers here would be any other quarterback not named Luis Perez in New York. It doesn't look like they're going to see too much use going forward. And then Tim Cook really getting beat out by Darius Victor, suppressing his value. No one I'm really holding steady from this team. Everyone pretty much saw a complete shift once we saw what Luis Perez could do when he played an entire game. All right, looking at the St. Louis Battlehawks, Jordan Teamu definitely sees another boost here. He is quietly performing as like the understudy for MVP right now. Yes, everyone's raving about Philip Walker, but seriously, don't forget about Jordan Ta'amu. He's playing great over there in St. Louis, giving this team a lot of life. Keith Ford got another touchdown, even though he only touched the ball 3 times this week, or 4, I believe, if you can count his reception. And this is the second week now that he's scored a touchdown, even though he hasn't touched the ball much, but he looks pretty electric when he gets the ball, so I wouldn't be surprised if they start using him more going forward. Demarni Pearson-El continues to get it done as the best slot receiver in the NFL. Brandon Riley behind him in the slot also looks pretty good, as does Marcus Lucas there at tight end. So this team has seen a pretty massive boost of its key players. Holding steady on Matt Jones. He had a pretty poor performance this last week, but they didn't really need him too much this week. The Dragons are pretty good at stopping the run, as we've seen thus far. So going against the defenders this week, who have been letting up massive gashes to the running back in the past couple weeks, look for Matt Jones to rebound pretty heavily this week. Also, sticking with LaDainian Washington, he's still getting targeted the second most outside of Demarni Pearson-El. But Alonzo Russell definitely taking a fall here, with Brandon Riley stepping up and Keith Mumbry getting a little more involved. He has been less consistent than we were expecting, so he's seen a fall in his value. All right, looking at the Seattle Dragons, BJ Daniels sees a massive boost in his value this week, taking over the reins of the quarterback position. He looked really good running the ball, okay passing the ball, but that really opens this offense up to a whole different, and it takes it to a completely different space with a running quarterback. That's definitely going to open up the run game more, with Kenneth Farrow there also seeing a huge massive boost to his value. He's been outperforming both Trey Williams and Jaquan Gardner, who both see a fall to their value. And then Evan Rodriguez, although he only had the 1 catch on the day, it was for a touchdown, so any tight end that's getting targeted in the red zone, someone we want to look at. Obviously, Brandon Silvers, he sees a massive fall in his value, getting his job taken from him by BJ Daniels. It doesn't look like he'll be getting it back anytime soon, unless BJ Daniels starts to disappoint. Holding steady on Keenan Reynolds and Austin Proel until we know more about how BJ Daniels is going to deploy his receivers. We don't want to panic on these guys too much yet. They also face a favorable matchup this week, so look for them to rebound a bit, especially if BJ Daniels has time to develop a bit more rapport with these receivers going into week 5. All right, and then the last team here, the Tampa Bay Vipers, sees a pretty massive boost to their key players here. Taylor Cornelius is looking more and more comfortable each week. Definitely sees a boost. He should have that job until he shows that he can't do it, which at this point it looks like he'll have it over Aaron Murray, who also looked pretty bad. Devian Smith and Jock Patrick both looking really good, getting over 100 yards on the ground. Devian Smith looking a bit more explosive overall and could end up being the leading running back after the season's over. So really like Devian Smith a lot. I think Jock Patrick value is a little bit inflated. He keeps doing this each week, so we'll see if he can maintain any sort of consistency. Daniel Williams still looks to be the most dominant receiver on this team, and as this team is getting better and better each week, you want to maintain him on you want to keep him on your team or get him cheap if you can. And then really whoever is the Tampa Bay tight end, they're looking to see their value go up. Nick Truesdale should be back soon, but DeAndre Goolsby looked pretty good this week. Jalen Tolliver definitely in our followers category. I was a little bit skeptical of his massive target share in the previous week, and it looks like that was a fool's errand chasing that. Daniel Williams is still definitely the main target here, with Reese Horn and the tight end stealing targets and the running game working so well. Jalen Tolliver is kind of the odd man out. He'll still have okay performances week in, week out, but not anything like what we saw in week 3. All right, let's jump over to the buy low, sell high section here. Get through this pretty quickly. I don't want to keep you guys here forever, but some guys to look at this week that I think will have a rebound performance in this next week that you want to try to acquire now before they get too expensive. James Butler, we've already mentioned, the running back for the Houston Roughnecks. Matt Jones had a very favorable matchup this week for the St. Louis Battlehawks. Kenneth Farrow should see a pretty big boost to his running back value. Running quarterbacks typically open up the game for the running back on the ground, and he's the most heavily involved running back in the pass game, has scored a touchdown the past 2 weeks. If someone is still sleeping on his value, you should get him right now. And then Martez Carter may have even been dropped after he didn't play this last week, so check your waiver wire, grab him if he's there. If not, try to trade for him. it's been a week since he's performed really well, so maybe the person that owns him forgot what he can do for the team. On the wide receiver side, Khalil Lewis still seeing a massive target boost. As I mentioned, his breakout game is coming, so make sure you get him on your team before that happens. Same thing for Rashad Ross. He had multiple deep targets, is still averaging the most yards per route run of every receiver in the league. It's going to happen. He's going to have a breakout game. It's just taken way longer than anyone would have hoped. Give him one more chance. You can probably get him for dirt right now. And then Austin Proel and Keenan Reynolds, both wide receivers, you can probably get for pretty cheap right now after they did pretty poorly on Saturday. But with B.J. Daniels coming into the fray, it completely shifts this landscape. And I'd rather be on the having someone on my bench blow up rather than have it be on someone else's team and then trying to acquire them later. So if you need a prospect at wide receiver, these are two good guys to target. Not too many sell highs this week, but I will mention a few names here if you guys are looking for some pieces you can throw into trades. I think Jacques Patrick is going to see this constant loop. I keep doing that for Jacques Patrick. That's just my Jacques Patrick move now. He's seen a great game in week 2, but awful game in week 1, and then awful game in week 3, but then a great game in week 4. It's like, until we see some consistency from this guy, I think you should sell while the iron is hot. See if you can get something better for him. Just be like, hey, he's the first guy to hit 100 yards and score a touchdown, and be like, look how good he looked on Sunday, and hopefully you can trade him. Nick Holley, another name. Don't have to trade him. Similar to what we said last week with some of our other guys there, is like, just because someone does really well doesn't mean that you have to trade them. It's just a name that I would throw out there in trades, because if you can turn Nick Holley into, like, if you have someone that's super irrational and be like, hey, I'll trade you Nick Holley and Jacques Patrick for Cam Phillips because Cam Phillips only scored 1 point last week. If you have someone in your league that's gullible enough to do that, take advantage of that. If they don't pay attention to what's going on, that's not your fault. So that's a name that I would throw out there. Use his performance from the last week to try to get one of those upper tier guys. Doesn't mean you have to sell low on him. That's obviously a sell high section. So if you have him or you acquire him on the waiver wire, don't look to sell him unless you can get value for him. And then DeAndre Goolsby is a name that I throw out there in the leagues where you have to have tight ends. Nick Truesdale will be back sooner than later, and once he does, Goolsby's value should go straight down the crapper. So try to get something for him now before his value goes to 0. Okay, that's pretty much it, guys. Pretty excited for this week. There's quite a few interesting storylines. Really interested to see how B.J. Daniels is going to perform. Going into Houston, should actually have a pretty decent chance of scoring a lot of points in that game. We'll see how Luis Perez can play going into Dallas, playing in a hostile environment there. See how Philip Nelson can rebound with the loss of Landry Jones, getting the starting reins again there. We'll see if the defenders can actually do anything going against St. Louis. They're playing in DC, so they get to go back home. Home team advantage has been huge this week, or huge in this league, so we'll see if the defenders can do anything at all. And then Vipers and Wildcats, two teams that are starting to see a little bit of a resurgence, but are really just fighting to find their identity in this league. That's going to be a really interesting game. I have no idea who I'm going to pick for that one. That one's a real big toss-up right now. I'll probably go with the home team, but not sure yet. So anyway, lots of cool stuff this week. Make sure you keep checking out our channel. We're updating a bunch of stuff on our website. We have some stats up there. We just loaded some more comparison charts. Now you can see how different teams perform against the wide receiver 1, the 2, the slot receiver, the tight end. Give you some even better insights into how we rank players for fantasy going into the next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Again, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps me a lot. Really do appreciate that. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next video.